2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 6 through 9. 2 Corinthians 12, 6 through 9. Paul writes, "For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth. But now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth of me. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations." Paul went on to say that there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing, Paul calls this thorn in the flesh a thing, I besought the Lord thrice or 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, the Lord responding to Paul's petition, "My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." And with God's help today, and with a heavy heart, and one filled with love and passion for this people of God, a POM and POA, I want to minister to us on this subject of my thorn. My thorn. And you may be seated in the presence of our Lord. I hope you didn't just sit on your thorn. I don't think you did, because you didn't pop back up. My thorn. On the heels of Paul's portrayal of his vision-like visitation to the third heaven, he contrasts his being caught up to paradise with the telling of his thorn. Thorns, as all of us could well imagine, and I trust would agree, thorns are unattractive, they are uninviting, and they are seemingly unnecessary, yet they somehow serve a purpose that surpasses our human comprehension and or comfort levels. In the natural, speaking in the natural, thorns, they play a vital role in the establishment and health of a plant. They act as a defense mechanism, protecting against animals and herbivores, eating and damaging the plant, allowing it to survive longer and guarding its vital structures. In some instances, thorns help to anchor the plant as it grows and climbs, allowing it to reach for more sunlight, as would be illustrated by a rose bush or a vine. Thorns can also aid in the adaptation to harsh environments, again helping the plant to evolve, to survive, and thrive in diverse habitats, concluding that while they appear obstructive and painful, they do actually contribute to the survival and the growth and overall well-being of that to which they are both a part and attached. Now, Paul the apostle, he could have exclusively highlighted the horrific perils that he encountered and suffered throughout all of his journeys. And in fact, in one chapter previous, in 2 Corinthians 11, he did just that, and he could have left it right there. There was certainly more than enough to look to, and more than anyone could have ever imagined enduring in one lifetime. And I want you, as you sit today and absorb the Word of God, as you survey and take inventory perhaps of what's going on in your life or your spirit or your family or whatever area of your life, you may identify a thorn, of which we'll speak more. I want you to consider, based on your scenario, what Paul endured, again, more than anyone could ever imagine enduring for a lifetime. 5 times, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times in bad luck. 5 times he is lashed and lacerated by a cat of 9 tails, being held against his will, being afflicted with this type of brutal treatment. 3 times, again, not once. It might have been unfortunate, an accident, wrong place, wrong time. Twice, 3 times, he is beaten with rods, beaten to a pulp. Once, he is stoned with stones. I can't even imagine a room of this size, a crowd, a mob, picking up rocks, going to the front, leaning into the landscape, picking up some of those smooth rocks and bashing someone physically in the skull with the stones that were in the hands of his opposers. 3 times, again, not once, I'm emphasizing, not twice, not an unfortunate set of stories, but 3 times he is shipwrecked. I'd never get on another boat again. 1 time, Robbie, 1 time, we go down in Lake Bourne, I'm not coming fishing ever again. Floating aimlessly. Not through the daylight, not through the afternoon, but through the dark and the night and the deep. Can you imagine with me the blinding darkness and being out? I've been as far as 70 plus miles off the shore of this United States of America. I've spent as many as 2 nights overnight on a fishing trip. I cannot imagine floating freely in the water in that kind of thick darkness, not knowing if there would ever be a rescue or if I would have the strength to doggy paddle long enough for someone to pass by and hopefully find me. Not to mention, Paul goes on the lengthy descriptive list of other perils. Again, I emphasize the plurality of these perils and the painfulness that piled up on Paul's traumatic resume. And I'm not sure how much or to what degree all of this took Paul by surprise. Because we cannot forget that when Ananias was said to in a vision, go and pray for Saul, who would then become later Paul, he went to the Lord and said, do you understand this man's reputation? He is dangerous. He is fierce. And God said, I will show him. Don't you worry about it, Ananias. You stay true to my orders. I will show Paul how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And I wonder this morning of myself, if God were to show me 24 years ago some of the things that I would live through and endure after encountering Christ, if I would have still said yes and signed up for this incredible life's journey. And it's something worth considering of your own self as well. So I don't know how much all of this took Paul by surprise. I don't know if the Lord gave him visions of shipwreck, visions of being lashed and lacerated, visions of being stoned and being persecuted beyond measure. But I do know that Paul came to understand this was not going to be a smooth road to destiny. And in the rehearsing of his other experiences, these were not the sum total. He categorically emphasized the magnitude of all of these occurrences by using comparative phrases such as more abundant concerning labors, above measure concerning stripes, more frequent concerning imprisonments, and offs as he talked about deaths. Because he was in a life and death scenario more times than any human being would ever hope or ever imagine being in. And there is no question this morning that all of us, we have all experienced the major life-impacting events that have forever shaped the trajectory of our lives and left their indelible marks upon us. On the good, if you will, to the joyful, if you will, the birth of a child will forever change the trajectory of your life. The achievement of a degree, the change and or choice of a career, looking back and understanding how life could have been so different had it not been for that one intersection or that major life event. On the opposite side, speaking of loss, the loss of a cherished loved one, our lives never being the same. Critical decisions that have proved either catastrophic or even fatal in their outcome as we survey looking back over our lives thus far. Sicknesses, surgeries, financial devastations, divorce, failed business ventures, betrayal in relationships, all of these major life events, they leave an indelible mark. And if we were to see a graph of our lives in reverse, we would see how that every major impasse, this, whatever it was, this thing, if you will, it had an impact and it changed the course of our lives. But nowhere, my brothers and sisters, do we find the Apostle Paul in consideration of all this. Do we find him complaining? Do we find him questioning or murmuring about having faced all of these distressing scenarios? Neither do we see him praying that the Lord would keep him from any further hardship or persecution. The only thing that Paul ever boasts about in his other writings is how that God, while he was in these places of life and death, he said death's oft, that God delivered him out of them all. The only boast we see is that every time I was in one of these major life-threatening or life-altering scenarios, God came to my rescue, Paul said, and delivered me out of them every single time. Is there anyone that has survived? Are there any witnesses in this house that there's been a major life event, but you are still here? You are still standing. You're still floating. You made it back to shore. You got your right mind. You have got your wits and your wherewithal. Are there any witnesses? I'm here to tell you, I've witnessed it. Oh yes, let me tell you, I have witnessed it. Hallelujah. I've witnessed it. But I want us to look as we go deeper into this text. When it came to this thing, Paul said all of that, I dismissed it. It was a part of the journey. But Paul is now found looking at this thorn in his flesh, and he's calling it this thing. This thing. I want you to say that out loud. This thing. And we find him over this thing, appealing to the Lord to remove the pricking of this thorn in his life. This thing. He doesn't say, God, don't ever let me get on another boat. Don't ever let me be shipwrecked. Let me never experience a beating with rod. Never let me be taken into prison again. He had a rap sheet a mile long. Never do we see, but this thing. And admittedly, among all the scholars and theologians, to this day, no one is exactly sure what this thing or the thorn was that Paul is requesting to be removed. Now, when we look at the word in the Greek, interestingly enough, let me indulge for a few moments. That word thorn, it means scapulos. It means it's a pointed piece of wood, or a sharp stake, or a splinter. In fact, one would say that it were, if an individual were decapitated, almost like a paling, like a stake that they would put that decapitated head upon. But as we dig deeper into the meaning of this Greek word, watch what it says. It's giving the impression that whatever it is dangerously sharp and excruciatingly painful. So we don't know what it is, but we know it's dangerous and we know it is excruciatingly painful. As you look at that word skalapos, it goes deeper. It is derived from a root word by the name of skilos. This means a leg from the hip to the toe. It means a leg, and that leg is lank, meaning that leg is atrophied. It is dry, it's limp and lifeless. And so it is derived, the word thorn, from these words. And it reminds me of Jacob wrestling with the theophany of God. Jacob's wrestling match with the angel of God, who was seeing that he was not prevailing against Jacob. And what did he do? He touched the hollow of his thigh, and it caused the sinew to shrink or dry up, and the hip, from the hip to the toe, was out of joint, and Jacob walked away halting. In other words, he was limping. In other words, there was, if you will, in that time, a thorn that he would have to live with for the rest of his entire life. In fact, when we go to Hebrews, and as we read the account of Genesis, Hebrews would later tell us that Jacob is still leaning on that staff. But you know what? More than leaning on that staff, you know what encourages me? You know what blesses my soul when I read that? Yes, he had to walk on a staff and lean on it for the remainder of the days of his life. But the Bible tells me that when he comes to the end of his days, he is leaning on that staff, but he is worshiping God. Jacob never lost his awe and wonder and worship of God. Yes, he was never the same. Yes, God didn't heal him miraculously. He had to live with that limp, but in so doing, he was worshiping God. And what we have to understand today, or at least my assignment to help us understand, is that the absence of this thorn's exact nature allows you and I to explore other applications that are broader in meaning. A thorn in the flesh could refer to a myriad of things. Perhaps you've already identified yours. It is a persistent source of annoyance, of pain, or difficulty. When we speak metaphorically of the thorn in the flesh, it is describing a personal struggle and or weakness, challenging situations or dynamics. It is speaking of opposition and or persecution, physical ailment or debilitating illnesses. It could mean addiction, past trauma. It could be those nagging personal insecurities that we fight and battle every day we wake up. And it can even be as much as a difficult or toxic or trying relationship in our lives. I don't know in the broadest sense what it is for you, but I would venture to say that all of us have, in some way, shape, or form, regardless of the nature, we all have a thorn in the flesh. If not now, maybe in the past, maybe in the future. But thorns, the thing about them is this: they're not always visible, and they're not always evident to others. And so you're sitting beside people around you, left, right, front, and back. You may not see their thorn, but chances are, most often, we all experience a thorn in the flesh in one season or time or another. And these thorns that no doubt we all have, they cause significant distress in and upon our lives. They're there. We feel them beneath the smile. We feel them when all the distractions cease. We feel them when the laughter fades. These thorns in the flesh may not be visible, but they are causing beneath the surface significant distress in and upon our lives. Thorns can be painful. Thorns can be agonizing, unbearable, even tormenting at times. Thorns are persistent. They are absolutely uncomfortable, restrictive, limiting, wearying, and they ultimately cause a great deal of frustration. These thorns in the flesh, we don't understand them, and they lead us to the question, God, why did you create thorns? And more importantly, Lord, what is the purpose of thorns, but why are you allowing these thorns to remain in my life? thorns. Thorns in the flesh. This thing, God, why? And there is no doubt in my mind that we have all been there or perhaps are there this morning. God, if you, don't you know what I can do if I did not have the thorn to deal with? They're hindering me, these thorns. My thorn is holding me back. My thorn, it hurts. My thorn, I'm struggling and suffering needlessly. If you would only remove this thorn, do you realize what I could do for you? Do you realize how the dynamics would change in my home, in my family? Do you realize, Lord, how far down the road I would be if it weren't for my thorn? God, what is the point? And what is the purpose of this thing or this thorn in my life? And the thing I'll never understand, and maybe you will and maybe you won't, the thing about purpose is that we often fail to identify it in the present. That's why we get frustrated. That's why we complain. That's why we question and we cry and we scream out to God, because we don't understand in the moment, the present, what the purpose of all of this thing is. And Paul reveals God's purpose for the thorn only as he gains understanding in reverse. If only God would show us up front, but he doesn't. Because then I would venture to guess we wouldn't then say, yes, Lord. We wouldn't take the journey to begin with. But in reverse, watch what Paul said, lest I should be exalted above measure. This was the purpose. Paul understood if God didn't introduce this thing into my life, I would be exalted. I would be puffed up. He's educated. He's empowered. He has got authority. He is very confident in who he is, in his knowledge, in the revelations that God has given him, in his heritage, in his ancestry. Paul is confident. He gives us the boast of being who he is in other epistles. He said, but through the abundance of revelation, because of this, there was given me a thorn in the flesh. So there's the why, the because that I would be exalted. And then he says, a messenger of Satan was sent to buffet me. And again, he repeats, lest I should be exalted above measure. Notice, he's reiterating the purpose, because now in reverse, he's understanding why the thorn was introduced to his life. And when the thorn was initially injected into Paul's life, no doubt he was perplexed in that moment. Haven't I been, I can only imagine Paul, I would love to have heard those prayer meetings, those petitions, if you will, from the inner court. God, do you see what I've been through? When you told me I would suffer, you didn't tell me that I was going to suffer like that. You didn't tell me, Lord, that it would involve shipwreck and being stoned and dragged out of cities. Lord, I thought there would be a little challenge here and there, a little difficulty every now and again. Do you see what I've been through? And Lord, haven't I proven my love and my devotion to you enough already? Abraham gets one shot. Put Isaac on the altar. God says, Abraham, now I know you love me. My God, Paul could have turned around. You don't know I love you by now? The first whipping, the first beating with rod. You don't know, Lord, where I stand with you by now? And I can only imagine, let me digress a moment to make a very powerful, I feel, point. I can only imagine how Joseph felt at the first. As his brothers, again, reading back through the story, his brothers, it's not, they saw him coming. It's not like they just, took him by the wrist and walked him into the pit. No. They physically assaulted him. 10 against 1. His own family, betrayal. They assaulted Joseph. They dropped him down into that pit. He could not get up. They ultimately later would have to lift him up, draw him up out. They dropped him down in. And watch this. 22 years later, I've never seen this before. 22 years later, They are vividly, as they're standing before Joseph, they are vividly reminded of that torturous event as they unknowingly come face to face with their brother who is posing as the Lord and the governor over all of Egypt. They don't know who he is. 22 years have gone by. He's not 17, he's 39 years old. 13 years before he appears to Pharaoh. 7 years of abundance. That's 37. They're 2 years into a 7-year famine. That's 39. And there they are to buy corn. And as they're going back and forth, and he's speaking Egyptian, and he doesn't realize, or they don't realize, he can interpret Hebrew. They said to one another, these 10 brethren, we are very guilty concerning our brother. Watch. In that we saw the anguish of his soul. It's the first time that we get insight to this event, this encounter. They saw the anguish. Could you imagine, Josh, 10 against 1? My own brothers, my own family. Could you imagine as he realized in the moment, they're not horsing around. We're not pillow fighting after dinner. No, they're literally out to kill me. And at some point, it turns dead serious. And the anguish, they said, we saw of his soul when he besought us. He was begging us for his life, but we would not hear. Do you think Joseph understood in that moment that there was a purpose? Absolutely not. How could there be any purpose in this beyond painful experience in Joseph's life? How could it be to be sold into slavery? Where's purpose in that? Purpose in slaving in Potiphar's house. Purpose in being lied on. Purpose in being betrayed. Purpose in catching a charge against you that when you're innocent. A purpose of being accused as a rapist and an adulterer. How could there be any sense or purpose in this in Joseph's life? And the years are going by. Not the days, not the seasons, not the months. The years are ticking away. But this blindness to the greater blessing in Paul's instance is what drove Paul's persistent petitioning of God to cause this thorn to depart from him. He goes to God 3 times. I would think when he approaches, he's feeling very confident in this relationship. He's seeing him in a vision. He's taught him all about this gospel message in the Arabian desert. He's having conversations. God is teaching him. He's tutoring him one-on-one. He's going to Jerusalem. He's confirming the word. He's running with the gospel message. He knows God. And he's got to go back 3 times, and the word says he besought the Lord. What that word means is he summoned God. Hey, God, come here. He instructed God. That's what this word means. He instructed him. Let me explain to you what you need to do. He is begging. This word means begging. I could see it as Joseph was begging his brothers. He is begging God in the anguish of his soul, release me, set me free. And in very simple terms, it just means to pray. But Paul continues to request the removal. Hear me, somebody. Paul is requesting for the removal of this thing, but God chooses to allow it to remain. He doesn't take no for an answer the first time. He doesn't take no for an answer the second time. Because he refuses, though God refuses to remove it, he refuses to accept God's answer in the matter. And thorns over time have a way, hear me somebody, thorns over time have a way of revealing a deeper purpose over time, a deeper purpose as it relates to the plan of God for our lives. It doesn't make sense, and I don't believe it was ever intended to in the here and now. It doesn't make sense today. It wasn't supposed to make sense tomorrow. But it doesn't mean that God is not the great puppeteer and orchestrator of our lives. Remember, Thorns have a purpose. We spoke of it in the natural. What was that purpose? To protect, to guard, to anchor, to aid in the adaptation of harsh conditions. I wonder in eternity what it's going to look like every time that I came and you came to an intersection, a juncture in the journey of life. I wonder the things which the thorns in our flesh have kept us from, that we don't even understand. In the moment, I was going back, Mom, through childhood. I was going back because I know that you don't think I understand. And I know that you look and say, well, he doesn't have kids. He didn't raise teenagers. No, but I was one. And I'm telling you, I look back at the thorns in the flesh. I look back at the pity parties. I look back at the anger, the frustration, the feelings of loneliness. I look back over all the fits that I wanted to throw, but for the fear of Ginger in my life, because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. But can I tell you, those thorns, there's no telling what those thorns kept me from. I can't even understand it until I get on that other side to understand what those thorns kept me from in my life, because they protect, they allow us to evolve, they keep us alive, they cause us to survive. Those thorns contribute to our growth and well-being. Thank God, somebody, for the thorn in your life that you don't understand right now. Thank God, somebody, for the thorn in your life that you don't understand right now. Watch this bomb. At least for me, I never saw this before. I never saw his brothers retell this torturous event, and I never saw this, Brother Mike. We know Genesis 50 and 20. Don't go there. Genesis 50 and 20, we know the infamous line, you thought evil against me, but God intended it for good, to preserve a people, blah, 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 that to feed and to keep alive. Right? But watch this. In the moment where Joseph's brethren are revealed to him, or he rather reveals himself to them. In that first encounter, there in front of the barns filled with corn, where they're there to purchase and survive another day, this is what Joseph says in this moment. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives. He's looking at his betrayers, his brothers, and he's saying, no. I understand now, 22 years later. I understand now. It makes sense. God sent me to keep you alive by a great deliverance. And watch, he says, so now it was not you that sent me here, but God. I've never seen that verse. I know 50 and 20. I know the end of the line. But I never saw that right there in that moment. Right there before his brothers, he recognizes, oh my gosh, they're coming. They're buying corn. My father's alive. My younger brother's alive. God, send me here to keep you alive. It's purpose understood in reverse. And I want to ask us a question. If you're Joseph, if I'm Joseph, are we angry? Are we frustrated? Are we upset? Are we doubting? Are we questioning the purpose and the plan of God in that moment? In that moment, that now God has reversed our situation. In that moment where we're no longer the victim, but we're the victor. In that moment where he's got all power and authority except that of Pharaoh and all the land, governing a nation. Understanding that what he felt as a young boy, he's remembering the dreams as they're bowing at his feet. Do you think in that moment he regrets the pain of the thorn, this thing in his life? No, why? Because purpose has a way of anesthetizing pain in our lives. It numbs it. It causes us not to feel it. For the greater elation, if you will, of the purpose of God in our lives. Brothers and sisters, thorns are reminders to you and I of our dependence upon God. Young, cocky Joseph thought he had all the answers. He had the dreams. He saw how it would play out in his life. But he never saw the pit. He never saw Potiphar's family. He never saw Potiphar's wife. He never saw the dungeon. He never saw the baker or the cupbearer. He never saw these strangers in his life. He just saw the end of it, but not the in-between. I'm telling you, the scripture talks to you and me that we must lean not upon our own understanding, but in all of our ways acknowledge God. I saw a verse this week I never read before. We're not going to like it, but it's powerful. And this is what Proverbs speaks of. I believe in 23:4. Labor not for riches. If we woke up tomorrow and we just obeyed that one command, how would the landscape of our lives change? Labor not for riches, he goes on to say, cease from thine own wisdom. Cease from our own wisdom. Trust in the Lord. He said, don't put your confidence in man and your confidence in princes and people in power. I'm talking about our needing the reminder that God is putting us in a place that we have no choice but to lean upon God, to depend upon God. Jacob was wrestling with that angel. He refused to let go. And I would say to us today, rather than God pulling out the thorn, let's get a grip on God like we've never put a grip on God before. Jacob refused to let God go. Hallelujah. He had to walk with a limp. He had to live with this thing for the rest of his life. But when he walked away, the power of God rested upon him, and he never lived another day of like kind. He was different from that moment forward. And I'm telling you, God wants you and I to be dependent upon him. Maybe what we're going to face next week, this may be prophetic in its origin or nature. But I'm telling you, there's going to come a time where God is wanting that utter and total dependence upon him. Thorns have a way of tempering us and keeping us humble. Paul knew it of himself. Do we know us? Can we be honest looking into the law of liberty? Paul looked into the face of, he said, I know that I would be exalted above measure because of the abundance of the revelation. Could you imagine returning from a trip to paradise? I'm going to tell you, there'd be a little bit something different about your walk and your talk. Oh, what'd you guys do this afternoon? Oh, that's it? Lunch at Chick-fil-A? You know where I was? Go ahead, ask me. Paradise. The Lord caught me up. I don't know whether I was in or out of the body, but I spent the afternoon. I can't even tell you about it because I saw things that were unlawful for me to mention. You peasants. You peasants. So, you're reading the word. I've been there. I'm going there. I'm guaranteed. You see my scars. I'm guaranteed a seat around the throne. Paul knew this about himself. What do you know about you that you could be honest enough to say, you know what? I need this thorn. I need it because I would become so cocky. I would become so proud. Or I would walk away from God. You know what David's prayer was? Don't give me too much and don't give me too little that I would betray God, that I would be a thief, that I'd have to rob and steal, or that I would walk away and just deny my Lord. He said, give me just enough to keep me right where I am. You know why David said that? He knew if he had too much, as if David didn't have enough already, but he knew there was a place in him, a limit in him, that if God gave him just a little bit more than what he really could handle, he knew he'd blow it. But he also didn't want to turn and be a thief and bring reproach and shame on the kingdom and on God and his name. He said, give me just enough. Thorns temper us and they humble us. Thorns build in us resilience and faith. They're not meant to refine our complaining skills. They are designed to build resilience and faith in us. We had a conversation the other day, last week it was, with a couple, and they looked at us and they said, my God, people, not everybody has the kind, and I'm not bragging on me, I'm telling you a conversation to prove a point. Not everybody has the kind of inner fortitude to survive what you have survived. But why? Where'd that come from? It's because experience, it builds in us a resilience. It builds our faith. Every time, you don't think Paul's faith was being built when he got rescued off the first shipwreck? Hey, God's got me. The second shipwreck? Okay, Lord, I'll go out on the next fishing trip. My faith is so high. You'll, if you have to lift me up on top of the water. He was building his faith because God delivered him. And every time God delivers us, our faith goes up a few degrees. Those thorns, I know we're not going to like this, they help shape our character. They help shape our character. Listen to Pastor this morning. God, unlike us, is not merely interested and passionate about our surviving another day and succeeding. We're so consumed with making it through the day. I'm just trying to survive. I just want to succeed. Can I tell you that God is so far more interested beyond another day's survival, another week, another month, another Christmas, another year? No. God is interested in not our daily survival, but in our divine development. I don't know. I'm not harping, but I just don't know. I want with every emotion in me to get this across. We somehow act as though we're victimized when God is developing us. He's developing us not to make it through the week, not to have a bigger bank. He's developing something deeper in us, and we think we're going to get there all by ourselves. We think we're going to get there just going to church, getting a degree, having a good job. We're not going to get there because God is playing the end game in your life. He's playing the end game in your life. Not the here and now, but the there and then. He's playing the end game. I don't know how to develop myself. I don't know how to become Christ-like in my character. I don't know where I need refining and where I need redeeming. I don't always see and know that. He's trying to shape our character. We think it's unfair. Remove this thing, God. No. You need that thing, Paul. Because you can't see Joseph. That one day, what I showed you in a snapshot is going to be the reality. Whether they liked it or not, they're going to bow at your feet. Whether they liked it or not, I chose you to be ruler over a nation that would nourish them, sustain them, and comfort them. At the end of Jacob's days, when his father dies, these boys are so frightened. They show up, and that's where 50 and 20, he repeats the line again. No, you meant it for evil. God sustained me. God meant it for good. And it's in that he says, look, I'm going to continue to protect you boys. I'm going to continue to feed you and all your kids and your grandchildren. And listen, he says, and I'm going to comfort you. I'm going to comfort you. You're safe with me. How did Joseph, do you know that when he said the first time God sent me here back in Genesis 42, do you know that he says that on the heels of imprisoning them for 3 days? He locks them up, throws away the key for 3 days. God pokes him in the night. Hey, he woke up the next morning. Hey, except I fear God, I'd have left you to die there like you did me. This is my point. There's still some things in Joseph's character that needed to be honed and refined to get to the point where it's like, boy, you're safe with me. No retaliation, no revenge, no eye for an eye. I'm going to nourish you and I'm going to comfort you and all your family. God is trying to develop in us patience, and we hate it. We hate it, but we need it. Perseverance. We don't care about it, but we need it. Compassion. I'll nourish you. How can you nourish someone else that you've never been through an experience that they can How can you cry with those that are crying? How can you hurt with those that are hurting? How can you feel the brokenness of those that are breaking apart? He said these qualities, these are thorns that produce qualities that often grow only through suffering. Thorns are a part of God's refining and redemptive work in our lives. They are tools for spiritual growth. Let me tell you, spiritual growth is not just books. Spiritual growth is not just going to happen because we pray a few minutes a week. I would challenge you to really, not that the minutes matter per se, but how often are we really praying? Let's get real. Are you putting in hours a week? 30 hours a day with the Lord? Are we putting in 30 minutes a day in the Word? And we think we're just going to spiritually grow and develop into Christ-like character for a couple of little minutes a day? No. Sometimes God needs to inject a thorn. It was good for me that I was afflicted. Why? Because, David, there are things in your life. I've got such destiny for you. I've got a dynasty awaiting for you. And David, you're just going a little bit off track. You're just looking a little to the left and sometimes a little to the right. I need to give you a little tool to help you develop and refine you because I love you too much to just let you exist. Trusting these thorns that are tools, trusting that God is going to use our difficulties to draw us closer to Him and shape us into who and what He intends for us to both be and become. God, my brothers and sisters, did not simply reject Paul's plea. His response came with greater spiritual insight, and I will come to a quick close. It came with greater spiritual insight, and that is what I'm trying to present to you today. Watch what Paul says with this greater understanding in reverse. God said to him, Paul, you can't tell me God's heart wasn't hurting for all that Paul went through. You can't tell me that he got joy out of watching Paul be whipped 5 times, watching him bleed, watching him be bruised, watching him cry and moan and groan on a prison floor. No, I don't think God was rejoicing over that. Look at my boy. Way to go, Paul. Wait till you see what I have in store next week for you. I don't think so. But this is what God says to Paul. Not in anger, but in compassion. He said unto me, Paul said, my grace is sufficient for thee. And watch, he said, my strength, Paul, my strength. I know you feel weak. I know that thorn is causing you to limp. I know you feel as though you could do so much more and be so much more in the absence of that thorn. But he said, Paul, I want you to understand my strength is made perfect when you are vulnerable and you are in your weakness. Could it be that God is wanting to bring a greater dimension of His strength into our lives? Greater than the pain of the thorn was the pleasure and the strength derived from God's grace. Now, I've never seen this. Maybe you already know this. To those of you that do, why didn't you share it with me? But that Greek word grace, charis, watch, I've never seen this, Brother Marty. It is defined as the divine influence upon the heart and its reflection in the life. It's the divine influence upon the heart and its reflection upon the life. God's grace. Think about God's influence. Would you rather me remove the thorn, Paul, and you go on in your own strength, trusting and leaning on yourself? Or would you rather, in a vulnerable condition, have my divine influence working and reflecting through your life? But I go on. Hold that music just a minute. I go on. It says grace, that which affords joy, pleasure, delight, sweetness, loving kindness, favor, merciful kindness. Would we trade our thorn for all of this? He goes on to say that it's God's holy influence. Your thorn or God's holy influence? Remove my influence or remove your thorn. Which do you prefer, Paul? Oh, no, Lord. I'll keep the thorn. You keep the influence flowing in my life because I can't make it without you. and you're doing something through it, there's a purpose. You know the limit of my pride. You know the limit of my self-exaltation. He said it increases us. It keeps us, God's holy influence. It keeps and strengthens and increases us in faith and knowledge and affection. There's that compassion, that affection. It increases us. So God is saying, Paul, my grace is sufficient for thee. This gift of grace, Paul, that I'm willing to give you in exchange for your thorn, he said, it is going to remain in your life because I want to do something greater than what you look at in terms of the negative side of that thorn that's piercing you, that's persistent and painful, and that's causing you to distress in whatever condition you find yourself in. He said, Paul, I am allowing it. I refuse to remove it. You're going to keep it. But I promise you will be sufficiently supplied. Watch what this word means. I know we understand sufficient, enough, content, suffice. All we understand that just on a surface stroke. But watch what I never saw. Sufficient. It means in the Greek to be possessed of unfailing strength. God says, no, Paul, my grace is sufficient. I am going to allow my unfailing strength to possess you. I can remove the thorn and you can go on in your own strength and no telling where you wind up. Or I can let my unfailing strength possess every aspect of your life. It means to be strong and satisfied and contented, and it means to defend. Remember that word thorn. It's a defense mechanism. God said, I'll allow my grace to defend you. I will let my all unfailing power and strength possess you. It sounds as if God is leaving him in this weakened, vulnerable, painful situation. And God is just simply trying to shift his perspective and making him understand what he is gaining in this thorn being present in his life. No wonder why Paul's next words, again, all of this is post-petitioning God. He said, oh, okay, my grace is sufficient for thee. Paul said, most gladly, therefore. Most gladly, therefore. God, because you're letting me know about your grace and sufficiency, then I most gladly, therefore, I rather glory in my infirmities. I didn't understand everything that was happening in the present moment, but now there's a purpose, and I will glory in the infirmity for your all-sufficient grace, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. The power of Christ. Stand with me this morning if you would. I wonder if I could put on night vision, an equivalent of spiritual night vision. If you could put it on, I wonder what we would see all over this place of the power of God resting upon us when we feel the weakest and most vulnerable. Because in the spirit realm, Paul was never more powerful than when that thorn was present. And I know that we all have a thorn in the flesh. That's something we're praying and even begging God to take away. But if you and I could ever see what his power is producing in our life, what he's defending and keeping us from, how he's causing us to be anchored and causing us to keep reaching for the sun, if you will, S-O-N. I wonder if we would then still say, God, get the tweezers, and remove that thorn. And I'm looking at people today that are great people of God. I'm looking at people today, there are some of you, and I'm just looking randomly, but there are some of you, if I can rip my heart out of my chest, and if I could go home and reach into my toolbox, if I had the ability, I am hurting so deeply for so many of you that I wish to God I could come in and fix it and de-thorn your life. But in reality, what would you be robbed of? What would you be being robbed of? See, we can't see the power of Christ that's resting upon us. But can I tell you, don't ever doubt and don't ever defy that truth, that the power of God is resting upon your life. Don't allow your feelings to cause you to believe otherwise. And this grace, I don't know if we truly understand this thing of grace the way I defined it and learned it this week in study. I don't know if we understand what grace is doing every day in our lives. It's a word we just say when we're praying or we throw around. I don't understand if we really know what grace looks like in our lives. It's not a free pass. It's so much more than that. It's the power of God. And again, I'll go back quickly and say, I wonder what we're going to see in reverse. That, but if not for the grace of God, where would we be today? And I look back and say, you know what? Would I trade going to those parties when I was 14 and 15, Brother Danny? Would I trade that for where I am today? Would I trade doing drugs with my high school buddies, going out on drinking binge? Would I trade that for where I am today? No telling what other scenarios we'll look back from eternity and say, would I have traded that for that one moment? Would I have given up all this? There's no way. There's no way. As we enter into this season of Thanksgiving, I want us to strive as best we can with this fresh understanding to be thankful for life's thorns, trusting, as did Joseph in reverse, that God had a plan all along. God had a plan. We often pray, God, I want to do great things for you. I want to be used mightily of God. I want this and I want that. And we have glimpses of the dreams that Joseph had. Joseph, if God would have showed him the pathway to the fulfillment of those dreams, I guarantee you that 17-year-old boy would have opted out in a heartbeat. God's got a plan for us. He's got a plan for you. I didn't choose the thorn, don't understand the thorn. If it was up to me, I'd remove the thorn. But I do trust that there's a spiritual developing going on in our lives that may not even be preparing us for the here and now, but more importantly for the then and there. This is the throne of grace, this altar. He said, come boldly. My altar plea, he said, come boldly unto the throne of grace. Grace is enthroned and we've got full access. Why should we come to the throne of grace, Paul? That we may obtain mercy. We need the mercy. But it's not just mercy that we find at the throne of grace. He said, and you'll find grace, God's divine influence, his all-possessing strength to help in our time of need. Does anyone need help today? Does anyone need help today? With your thorn, can you halt to this altar today? And if you can halt to this altar today, God, you're going to experience God's mercy and you're going to find grace at this throne, at this altar. There is grace to be found today. Grace to be found today in your time of need. Let's stop petitioning for the removal and start rejoicing, giving thanks for the injection of whatever hindrance is causing us to halt right now in our present lives. Come on, in the name of Jesus. Come on, in the name of Jesus. There's something deeper beneath the soil taking place. If it were up to me, a rose bush doesn't need thorns in my estimation. A rose is beautiful enough without the thorns. But how does it ever strive and climb to reach the sun, to discover its beauty and its brilliance without the thorns? Come on, let God minister to you. My grace, Sharon, my grace is sufficient for thee. My grace is sufficient for thee. I'm going to deliver you out of all the distresses. My grace is sufficient. I'm not just leaving you with a thorn. I'm giving you grace. The sufficiency of grace. We say, oh God, I wouldn't get exalted. Oh God, I would stay humble. Oh God, I would, and I would, and I would, and I would. And God says, no, that heart in you, Paul, it's deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. I know where to inject the thorns. I know where to insert it to bring you to your greatest potential and the fullness of what I desire to make you. As we begin to lift our voices, come on, every one of us in this house today, the all-sufficient grace of God, the all-sufficient grace of God is available in this place. Let's pray. Come boldly this morning. Come boldly and worship Him. Come on, your thorns have a purpose. God has got unlimited grace.